So I am going to have everyone introduce themselves, and hopefully my computer stays on, but I'm going to have to sign back in. So if you guys can hear me, just go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll be right back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Sanja. I am originally from Trafalgar, Dominica, but right now I reside in New Jersey. I'm very happy to be here tonight on this important topic of parenting in the 21st century, challenges and opportunities. I've been an educator since 1999. I'm currently a technology coach for a public school in New Jersey. And I'm also an entrepreneur with my company, EdTech LLC, as well as the Student Success Foundation. So look forward to an exciting and informative conversation tonight.
And good evening, I'm Niambi Mathieu, and I am currently residing in Canada. And, I'm a trained parent educator. My current job is as a director of development. I work in international funding, and I'm also a professor at the post-secondary level, teaching in a postgraduate program. And I am also delighted to be part of this conversation tonight. I'm a parent, and I approach parent education from a peer-to-peer standpoint. So I'm excited to share my insight in this topic and, of course, encourage learning together. And Anthony, it looks like we may have lost Simone for a little bit there.
Yes, it seems so. So I guess let's continue the conversation. Niambi, did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So can you tell me a little bit more of your work, where you are right now, and what are some of the things that you're doing?
Well, as I said, I work in development, so I am on the executive team of an international funding agency. We work with HIV and AIDS affected people in sub-Saharan Africa, ensuring that community-based organizations, grassroots organizations have the funds they need to address the AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. And so my work is predominantly with women and girls.
Yes, guys. So I am back. I truly do apologize. That's technology for you. You click the start button, and unfortunately, the system goes down. But I am here. DJ Shan, nod if you can hear me. And we are off and ready to go. So the question we have for you this evening is, who is raising our children? So we look around and we see, children running off to Guadeloupe without parental consent. We hear cases of constant fighting. We hear of social media influencers constantly bombarding our kids with information. So the question we have for you this evening is, who is raising our children? And I'm sure that everyone has a lot to contribute to this conversation. So I am truly grateful that Mr. Anthony Sanja and Mrs. Niambi Mathieu is here with us. As you can hear from the names, their names are familiar because other relatives of them have made contributions to this program. So again, this is episode number 34 of Roots Connections on Q, right here on Q95, the big station. And I am Simone Mathieu. So Anthony is the brother of Mr. Peter Sanja, and we will all know of Mr. Atherton Mathieu, who is the uncle of Niambi Mathieu. And Niambi is having some technical difficulties this evening, so she will probably most likely have to keep her camera off so she can be a part of this conversation. But we are here. We are grateful for the opportunity to be here for another packed 2 hours of programming. And again, I do apologize for the technical issue at the beginning of the program, but we are here and we are off and running. A special good evening to DJ Shan. Thank you for being on the console. We keep Lambert Charles in our prayers. Thank you, Sherwin Norris, for keeping us connected. And as always, a big thank you to Mr. G, Mr. Sheridan Gregoire, for giving us the opportunity to tap into our human resources around the world. So the basic premise of this program is that many of our Dominicans have left Dominica and now they are ready to make a contribution back to the society. So we're happy to be able to tap into their knowledge, their expertise, to be able to make a contribution to Dominica. And this is especially important with regards to financial contributions. You know, I don't know if you have an opportunity to hear Dr. Valda Henry recently, but she said that there can be no real independence if we do not first have financial independence. So a big part of what we do is try to secure the financial independence of Dominica. But as we know, there are other areas of our lives that are just as important and which are evolving and changing. And so this evening, we're looking at parenting. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to look at parenting in the past versus parent today. What was good back then? What is good today? Jillian, go ahead and mute your mic as you're coming in, please. What was good back then? What is good today? And vice versa, because we know that there are many, many challenges of raising children now, because we're looking at the world and we're seeing all these very complex and complicated problems. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we raise children who still have those core important values that we grew up with, but yet they are creative and they are problem solvers and they know how to navigate this world. So of course, if you're joining us on Q95, if you're listening to us, a pleasant good evening to you. And if you're joining us on Facebook, don't forget, you can always jump into the Facebook Live on Q95 FM radio on Push Past 10. And on YouTube, we're on Q95 FM radio. So again, on Facebook, Q95 FM radio, Push Past 10, and on YouTube on Q95 radio. So again, thank you for being here. As we have in the house in Canada, we have Mrs. Niambi Mathieu. In the US, we have Mr. Anthony Sanja. And in Dominica, we have Mrs. Jillian LaRocque. And I don't think you had an opportunity to introduce yourself, Jillian. So go ahead and greet the audience and just tell us a little bit about you.
Good evening, everyone. Jillian LaRocque here. I'm an educator and mentor. I am a strong proponent of self-learning because I've done that for many years. I've been a tutor for over a decade locally here in Dominica, helping students, especially primary school students, and also bringing in parents to get our students to not only perform well in their academics, but to feel better about themselves and the value that they bring to life, and also to understand how important education is for their future. I'm also a sales and marketing coach. I do a lot of things, but everything surrounds helping others around me to go further. Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone.
Yes, thank you for being here. And again, good evening to all our listeners or viewers on Facebook and YouTube. And again, if you're just joining us, we're talking about parenting in the 21st century, the challenges and the opportunities. So Niambi, I wanted to come over to you because you had mentioned a particular principle of parenting, which I thought was fascinating, and it is called the Alderian principles of parenting. So let's start with that this evening.
Sure. So in terms of the Alderian parenting goals, it's a principle that I employed with my children. When I worked in community development, I had the opportunity to work with youth primarily. And when you work with youth, obviously you end up working with parents. And so I became a trained parent educator to help parents navigate many of the issues that they were facing with their children. And because those children were largely from immigrant homes, so it was primarily Black children of Caribbean descent and South Asian children, South Asian youth. There were many issues around assimilating to a Canadian style of parenting versus a culturally appropriate and culturally normative type of parenting that they were used to back home. And so the principles that we use are about around three areas. It's about building connection with your children, helping children to be capable, and encouraging your children and empowering them to be able to stand in their own imperfections and to be able to handle all that comes their way, to build their self-esteem and self-confidence. So when we talk about connection, it's essentially helping a parent to transform their parenting style to a more democratic and inclusive style where they treat their children with equality and respect, and they perpetuate behaviors that help the children understand that it isn't just about respect between child and parent, but respect within the entire family. So respecting each other as siblings and peers. And then in terms of building capabilities, it's about teaching your child to solve problems, encouraging them to think for themselves. So culturally, we have a very type of domineering approach in terms of, being a very authoritarian. And so this style of parenting focuses more on helping the child to navigate their own problems and helping them by getting them involved in making family decisions, and, kind of problem solving for themselves with your support, of course. And then the courage piece kind of speaks for itself. It's identifying each child as an individual. So in families where there are multiple, so in the case of my family, I have 3 children, each with their own personalities and each with their own temperament. So treating each child as an individual, and encouraging and developing the skills that each child has as an individual. And that's the premise, that's the foundation of the principles upon which then you build your parenting style. So I'll stop here for now.
Yeah, and very good information. But the first thing that jumped out, because I know our listeners must be thinking, equality, children as equals. I can already hear the uproar. So Anthony and Jillian, feel free to jump in, because I think what we are seeing here is the differentiation between authoritarian versus authoritative parenting. And I think that is a very important distinction we need to make today, because in the past, parenting essentially was do what I say and don't ask any questions, because I'm the boss, I'm the ruler, and that was pretty much more of an authoritarian approach. So let's talk about the difference between authoritarian and authoritative parenting.
I can contribute right now on this topic. So they are very different. They sound similar, but they are very different. And I can say, based on my experience as a child, and now I'm a parent, I have 2 boys, 1 5 and 1 3. I've not been at it very long, but it has been a very interesting and eye-opening experience for me. When I compare authoritarian and authoritative, I believe that we must include our children. They have a voice, they have opinions. My 5-year-old has so many opinions, and I can see why some adults behave how they behave. It is based on how they were parented. Because if your voice is stifled when you are growing up, when you become an adult, it is very difficult to be able to communicate properly, very difficult to discuss. And those are very essential skills for both learning and developing relationships as we grow and as we do many things in the workplace, on the roadside, by the bayside, in the bar. Those things are very critical. So I know that some people may say that authoritarian parenting worked well for them. Others may say it did not. But I respect every parent's way of parenting their children. What would work for me may not work for you. But I think that generally we ought to treat children as individual people with hopes, dreams, and opinions, and they should be free to share those opinions.
Excellent.
I
Anthony.
certainly agree. You know, I'm a proud father of two children. I have a 13-year-old son and a 6-year-old, actually 7-year-old daughter. Oh boy, if she only finds out that I mentioned that she's 6-year-old, that'll be the end of it for me. But anyway, I tried both the authoritarian and the authoritative style of parenting. And I tell you what, one thing I realize is that, you know, all human beings, whether we are children or adults, all right, we all want to be heard. And I think what Ms. LaRocque mentioned about developing relationships, right? This is also key. We want to be heard, and we want to have some kind of healthy relationships. And one thing I realize is that with the authoritative parenting style, it provides opportunity to do both, to have that connection, as well as to develop that relationship. In the past, whenever I say, do as I say, and nothing else, right? That tends to, I tend to get so much pushback, right? Even from especially from my daughter. My son is much more of a type B personality, and my daughter is certainly a type A. And she will let me know, no, Dad, you're wrong, and she pushed me back on my feet. But when I do listen to them, and I practice effective listening skills, right? So I listen to what they say, I repeat what they say to show that at least I understand. Not necessarily that I agree with them, right? But the first step is to show that I understand. That helps to build that relationship, and that helps to build that connection. And lastly, one thing that I have to mention is that before you correct any child, we must have a connection. So connection before correction.
Yeah, Simone, I feel like we should have probably prefaced this conversation with a disclaimer in that, I am a parent educator, but the first rule we learn in training is about creating space for people to parent in the way that works for their family. And so I certainly don't want to present myself, and I'm sure the other panelists will agree, as the authority on parenting and the way that I am proposing that has worked for me and several other people is the only way to go. So I want to start from that place. And I also want to recognize that, for me, it's almost surreal to be a part of this conversation because I actively avoid having conversations about parenting with my peers from the Caribbean because it differs so drastically from what we have learned, what is ingrained in our society and what is accepted as normal. And I think there's a perception that when you choose a more authoritative, and I like to say a more inclusive parenting style, you're actually being permissive, which is quite the opposite. The principles that I talked about in the beginning, the Alderian principles, is actually based on teaching children consequences and focusing on what I consider to be true discipline. And I think we can get into a conversation as we move on about, the difference between what we perceive to be discipline and what discipline actually is. Discipline is a constant process of teaching and encouraging that gives your child tools to navigate not just their relationships within the house, but that trickle down effect in terms of how they show up in society, whether it be to relating to their boss or their spouse in the future or their friends. Discipline actually gives you a firm foundation on which you should build, right? It doesn't focus on the problem and ending a problem of misbehavior. It actually gives you tools over time to choose the things that are advantageous for you in terms of your behavior. So
yeah, and you know, yeah, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to add that preface. I think we should have done the disclaimer at the start.
Yes, I completely agree. But you know, I still want to stay on the point that many of our listeners might be thinking that, you know, it worked for me. I didn't have a say in being a child. I was simply told to do what I was ought to do, and I did it, and it worked for me because I am a functional, productive adult right now. So why should I adopt any different style?
I mean, for me personally, it was a journey. I didn't just wake up and arrive here. So obviously, most of us grew up in a society that accepts a certain type of parenting style as normal. Our parents and the parents before them and the parents before that used a style that included almost like shutting down the views. Children must be seen and not heard. I'm sure we've all heard that, or don't involve yourself in adult conversations, when many times a child just has a point of view that they would like to add to a conversation that is happening within their earshot, or ask a question that is probably something that they could learn from, right? But those things are shut down. For me personally, like Anthony had said, I initially, when I started my parenting journey, defaulted to what I knew. Even though I would have to say that I am probably in the minority among our peers, Simone, where like my father never spanked us. My father is very anti-spanking. If you want to get him upset, hit a child in front of him. He absolutely does not like that. So I'm in the minority, but still growing up in a society where that was normal, it would have been my default with younger cousins or whoever was in my charge to default to that. They started by teaching me a valuable lesson in that spanking does not work to correct behaviors. And so once I had my own children, I had to examine, why is this your default behavior? And the truth is, oftentimes we default to those behaviors because of our own triggers. So most times a parent defaults to spanking a child, it's because they were fearful. So they were afraid something was going to happen to this child, or anger and frustration. I'm frustrated with your behavior. You're not doing what I said. I'm angry about it. Or they're disappointed. The child hasn't lived up to their expectations. But all those things are about you. It's not about the child. And I think the relearning, when we say, oh, I'm okay, I got spanked and I'm okay. No, because if you really had to sit down and think about the trauma and the baggage and how being spanked made you feel, maybe you've compartmentalized it. And now that you're an adult, you think it's okay. But in that moment, how did you feel? Did you feel loved? Did you feel encouraged? Did you feel that you could do your best? Did you feel safe? And our responsibility as parents is to create a framework in which our children feel safe, loved, encouraged, capable, that they can do anything. And demeaning and shaming them is not enabling, right? I'll just ask Jillian or Anthony to add to that.
Yeah, and I wanted to chime in real quick because I want to bring in Anthony and Jillian, because I think it begs several questions, in terms of our approach to parenting back then. Was it really effective, right? Because I know for me, I was spanked. My mom used corporal punishment, and that is what she knew at the time. So we also have to keep that in mind that, our parents used what they knew to do because that is what they had been exposed to themselves, right? But in my experience, and I'm sure many of our listeners can identify with that, it made me a very timid, shy person with no voice. Ironically, right? I have a voice now, but that took many, many years of building my own self-confidence because, and in this particular world that we live in right now, we need to ensure that our children have a voice. Because especially when we talk about abuse, sexual abuse, the fact that a lot of the kids don't feel empowered to speak up because we have taught them that children ought to be seen and not heard. So we have now to reconsider many of what we learned in the past in terms of our approach to parenting. And it also begs the question that society has changed and continues to change and now calls on a new approach, which is what Niambi was just talking about. And especially a point that someone raised before, that parenting cannot be a one size fits all approach. So just because you have 2 or 3 different children in a household, you have to learn your child. And like Annette Phillip is saying on the Facebook Live, corporal punishment never worked for her. So what is going to work for your particular child? Anthony, I see you nodding away, so you're agreeing. So let me hear what you have to say.
Sure. Well, while you were speaking, I was thinking about my own childhood, and I don't. Well, first of all, I don't remember getting spanked by my late mother, right? And I probably got spanked by my father. Like actually, there's one time I remember getting spanked by my father in Trafalgar. I was playing basketball and I didn't get home in dinner time, and I remember my dad broke that branch and he beat me right there in the road, right? But I know he felt bad because my father was a gentleman. And I know he was angry, and I could see that the sorrow after he hit me, right? But my consistent spanking actually did not come from my parents. Actually, it came from my sister, Cecilia. So, Sister Jackie, if you're listening, I still remember the spanks that you gave me, right? But none of them actually came from my brother, Dr. Peter Sanja, right? And if anyone was that type of authoritative parent or sibling, that would be my brother. But I was nodding because I certainly agree with you when you mentioned about timid. And while you were doing so, I was looking at some research coming in from the National Institutes of Health. And the title is Authoritative Parenting Stimulates Academic Achievement, also partly via self-efficacy and intention towards getting good grades. And I know this is true. From my experience as a college student, right? And my discussions with my cohorts of my peers, I realized that my peers who came from a more authoritative home, much like my home, right? They were less shy. If they received let's say a C on a term paper, they will negotiate with the professor to get a better grade. On the other hand, the parents or my friends who came from more of the authoritarian type of do as I say, and sometimes not as I do households, they were afraid of the professors. They will not dare challenge anyone, the professors or anyone in authority. So there are certain benefits of that authoritative parenting style. It leads to children being more timid, as you mentioned, much more shy, and it reduces fear. And one thing that we also did not mention tonight is that I believe that when we spank our children, right, it teaches them a lesson that it's okay for them to spank others as well.
Absolutely.
So in a world where we're striving for more peace, we're striving for more conflict resolution, more positive conflict resolutions. And just like Mahatma Gandhi said, we should be the change that we expect to see in the world. And by practicing positive parenting, including not spanking, allowing the children to have a voice, and most importantly, and I keep stressing over again, allowing your children to be heard. This helps to develop the child psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and many other ways, right? So I just wanted to stress these points.
Excellent. Jillian?
Well, guys, Spanking is part of the whole disciplinary process for me. I will tell you that. I do not spank my children for everything they do. I don't. I have an open relationship with my 5-year-old. We talk about everything. I give him the leeway. If I say something and you do not agree with what I say, you can respectfully have a conversation with me. So we will talk about, I'm not saying that when you bring your point to the table that I will agree with you, but I'm giving you the opportunity to give your side, to share your views on what is at the issue at the time. In fact, even my 3-year-old, I says to him, you were taking this just tonight, and I said to you, do not take it. Yet you continued taking it. What you should have done was say, excuse me, mom, this is why I am taking it. And then we have that conversation. And I will tell you, okay, go ahead. Or I will say, no, I still believe you should not take it. So I believe in the giving my children a voice. Sometimes the spanking comes for a certain level of boundaries based on what the behavior is, what previous discussions we have had about that particular behavior. Maybe it is because I don't want to go crazy, because Niambi mentioned, our own feelings as well. So maybe it's because I don't want to just go postal that I may spank, but it's part of the general disciplinary actions for my children. And I also think that our actions in terms of what we mirror, because our words and our actions sometimes do not mix as parents, whatever disciplinary style we use. Our actions, we cannot say do not do this, or many times parents tell children do not do certain things, and they do it without saying, okay, I told you not to do this, but as an adult and my knowledge and my self-control, you have to explain. Some people don't like to explain to their children, but some things you have to explain so the child doesn't look at the inconsistency and lose that respect for your rules. So parenting, it's hard work.
Yes, yes. And I'm happy we're having this very candid conversation, because I think we should stay on the topic of punishment and discipline right now, because I think we're advocating more for withdrawing privileges, timeouts. But what happens when those things don't work? Niambi, as a parent educator, what is the recourse? You've tried, your patience. You've tried explaining things over and over and over again. And then you've done the timeouts. You've done the withdrawing the privileges, no iPad for today, but nothing seems to be working. What is the recourse?
So I will confess, I've never done a timeout in my house. I have 3 children. My eldest is 18 years old, just started university. I have a 16, soon to be 17-year-old, and I have a 12-year-old. They've never had a timeout. They don't know what that means. For me, like I mentioned earlier, I think that discipline is about a process that happens over the lifespan of an individual, and it's not just for children. Discipline is about constant learning, about self-regulation and making choices based on what is available to you, and choosing the ones that are advantageous to you in the long run. So my approach to discipline in my children is to help them understand that every action they choose has a consequence. And that consequence might be the fact that they may not have access to something that they really enjoy. They may end up wasting time and not being able to go out with a friend. Every action they choose has a consequence. And by helping them understand good consequences and bad consequences, it helps them make decisions that demonstrate that they have discipline. It's something that is proactive. So discipline is proactive. It's not based in punishment. It's proactive, and it results in a pattern of good behavior that both children and parents mirror to each other. So, as an example, in teaching my children about discipline and making good decisions, one, I had to dispel my preconceived ideas about spanking being an option for me, but also yelling. I really had to unlearn yelling, because while I didn't get spanked, yelling was like, I mean, yelling is part of our culture. Like, we yell for everything, we talk loud. Even now, like at work, I say to my staff, I have a loud voice. It's going to sound like this when I have to talk to them, right? So even unlearning things like yelling and how it makes someone feel like as if you're demeaning them or confronting them or putting them in a submissive position, is also part of the disciplinary process. When you moderate your tone, when you moderate your voice, when you choose words that are non-threatening, it then gives your child the tool to mirror those things back to you. And also, like, the question for me, I often ask parents is, what is the difference between a child and a parent? A parent is but only someone who's been here longer, but you don't have any other than the fact that you have experience and have experienced certain things and can apply the learnings. There's no difference between how you want to be seen and how a child wants to be seen. You want to be accepted and loved. Your child wants to be accepted and loved. No child just wakes up and says, I am going to misbehave for the sake of misbehaving. Just as any adult doesn't wake up and make a bad decision for the sake of making a bad decision. And I'm not talking about criminality and that type of stuff. I'm just talking about in everyday life. The things you want for yourself and how you want to be valued as an adult are exactly the same things that your child wants, except that they do not yet have the depth of skill and experience that you have to help them self-regulate. And so our role as parents in disciplining and helping our children learn the art of discipline is to encourage that self-regulation. If we focused more on controlling ourselves in our interactions with our children, then our children will have the skills to focus on regulating themselves in their interactions with us. So, for example, picking your battles, deciding what is the absolute, like in my house, like I said, my children are individuals and get treated as such. So I might say to one child, it's your turn to do dishes today. Those dishes will stay there till 9:55 p.m., right before she's ready to go to sleep. Reluctantly, she'll drag and do it. The other one, as soon as school is done and I say, it's your turn to do dishes, will do those dishes almost immediately. Now, as a parent, I can choose to be upset, be frustrated, be in my feelings, feel like I wasn't listened to and I have lost control of a situation simply because a task is not done when I ask for it to be done. Or I can say, is this an issue? What is the difference of having those dishes done at 6 p.m. or 9:55 p.m.? Is my end goal having my child contribute to the household by doing this particular chore? Yes, it is. So I think, a lot of times it just takes a lot of practice, self-awareness, and showing up for your children as imperfect adults is another thing that we don't do, right? There's a lot of pressure on kids to be perfect in front of their parents. Everyone is aspiring to please their parents. And that's because the perception that we create as parents is that we don't make mistakes, we're perfect, everything was honky-dory, and we set the bar that our children are continuously aspiring to and sometimes failing simply because that's not what they're good at. It's not, who they are as individuals. It's not the path for them to go on. And then we're robbing them of their individuality, their creativity, and their voice by making them think that we're the gold standard of behavior and that we never, ever, we're not flawed.
Yeah, very well said, Niambi. Thank you so much for that contribution. Anthony and Jillian, I want to come to you guys as well, because I also find the importance of parents themselves taking a time out. So if you find that you're extremely frustrated with the situation, I tired, talk to that child, like we would say in Dominica, and you just keep repeating yourself over and over, and you feel tempted to simply lash out because you've lost it, right? I have found that the best approach is to simply take a time out. And I will say, I am going to take a time out.
Absolutely.
I will say, okay, this is the point where I walk away for a minute. I'll be back.
For sure. In fact, you took the words right out of my mouth. That was like my next point. So Dr. Matt, I think you're reading my mind now, right? So yes, I believe that when we get to this point, we do have to take a time. But just this weekend, I was disciplining my son over a private issue. And I had to tell him, listen, Amari, dad needs a timeout, and I think you need a timeout as well. And we need to have this conversation at a later time. All right. And so it's very important. And also, in addition to that, one thing that was not mentioned tonight is the word grace. Right. As a Christian, I believe that we are all sinners. None of us are without sin. The same way that I've yelled at my children before, right? I mentioned I did practice an authoritarian type of discipline before, and I realized the shortcomings of it. And even our children. I think Niambi mentioned about our children being little adults, right? We expect them to be perfect, and part of being a child or of being an adolescent is to go through these experiences, making mistakes and going through failures and learning from them, right? And I think when our child falls short of expectations, I think this provides a perfect opportunity for us to teach grace, to teach that type of forgiveness that we learn from Christ and from in the Bible, right? So, for me as a father, especially when dealing with my son who's going through this adolescent age, there are times I have to practice it, and I have to let him know, Amari, I'm going to forgive you right now, or I say, you know what, or I would say I'm gonna practice some grace right now, and I have to let him know, because I want him to whenever he's dealing with his peers to also practice grace, so that he could regulate his emotions, he could regulate his temperament, and he could practice forgiveness. And I believe that is very important. So in addition to taking that time out, forgiveness is key. Christ said, how many times should you forgive someone if someone wronged you? Well, 7 times, 77 times, I believe, right? And so, do we really practice that? Do we really forgive our sins? I mean, do we forgive our children? Do we forgive ourselves? Because oftentimes, what I realize is when I practice bad punishment, I realize I am repeating something that I probably didn't forgive myself for, or I am replicating some kind of a bad experience I probably had. And so I did not completely forgive myself. And as a result, I'm not forgiving my child, and I'm not practicing that grace. So,
that's such a good point.
Yeah,
that's such
absolutely.
a good point. And what you just said in terms of like, you yourself haven't yet processed the trauma that you are carrying from some of the behaviors that you have exhibited. And in parenting, I think there's a lot of manipulation that happens, a lot of guilting. Oh, you should be happy that I am doing this for you. Like a lot of guilting and shaming and projecting that parents do. That, ultimately people who had that type of upbringing that say they're okay, they're not okay. Because then they go on to mirror those exact behaviors in their interaction with their children. And I think, before you have your children, you should heal yourself. You should heal yourself of your trauma and forgive yourself and give yourself grace so that you can show up imperfectly in front of your children and be okay with it. Because that's the only way you're going to accept their own imperfections and love them as they are.
Jillian?
I agree with much of what was said in relation to forgiveness and showing grace. it is a learning experience as we go through the process. Not only learning, what works in terms of disciplining the child, but learning the child. And even if you have one child, as a parent, you have to be mindful of looking to understand that child, looking to understand their behaviors and how they think, what triggers them, and also understanding what triggers you as a parent. I take a lot of time out, Anthony. Those times always when I don't spank, that's a time out I'm taking. But yes, I definitely believe that you should step back, because whether it's spanking or anything else, you want to make sure that however you discipline has the effect that you want it to have based on the situation. Every situation is different. And I speak to my boys and I say, okay, Noah, you should not be doing this again. You tried it a first time. This is what happened. I'm trying to reason with you. I understand you are trying things out. You are curious. So this is what happened the last time when you tried it. So this is what was going to happen this time again. You can stop trying that, because I understand that it's his curiosity, trying to understand how things work, trying to understand how things react to certain behaviors or how people react. So I sometimes have that candid, like, adult conversation. You tried that, it did not work, or that is what happened. So this time, that way, what you don't have to try it again. So it's really having that understanding that it's a person and there's always a reason behind the behavior. But there are some things that lying, I hate it so much that sometimes I have to go a little extra.
And thank you for being honest.
Yes, I have to go a little extra on some of those things. And maybe I need a class. So maybe Anthony on Niambi, because I'm open to learn. I do not think that what I'm doing is just the best and that is what I'll do forever. It's a learning process for me. Sometimes
and that is something I want us to touch on as well, the importance of learning parenting skills. Anthony, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but if you're just joining us, you're listening to Roots Connections on Q, and we're talking about parenting in the 21st century, the challenges and the opportunities. And we're just talking about how do we create this sort of children, the adults, the productive members of society who feel empowered, who have a voice that is empowered, who the sort of people who are ready to take on creative problems. Because we look around, this is the first time in 100 years the world has faced a pandemic. So are we creating children? Are we raising children that are prepared to take on these unique world challenges? Or are we simply using the methods that were probably used with us and creating children who are timid, who feel they have no voice, who feel oppressed, who are not ready to be productive members of society because they were never taught how to have a conversation on what they're doing wrong as opposed to being punished? So we're sort of looking at the difference between discipline and punishment. And I think one of the things, Anthony, before I come to you, is knowing your child's currency. So what do I mean by knowing your child's currency? We all have things that are special to us that we look forward to at the end of the day. I might look forward to watching a little 90-Day Fiancé at the end of the day. A child might look forward to a nice toy that they've been waiting to play with for the entire day after school. A teenager might look forward to speaking to their friends on the phone or maybe having that iPad time. What is that currency that if you remove it from them, it will alter their behavior? So I think it is very important to zone in on those things rather than always resorting to physical punishment. So Anthony, I want to come to you, and then I want to talk also about the role of the village, the role of the church, the role of the school. And we also must remember to acknowledge those who are not biological parents, but have played an incredible role as a parent, right? So we're talking about the aunts, the grandparents, the adopted parents, the step parents, and everyone who has stepped into that role because the child's biological parent was simply absent for one reason or not. And we want to commend these people, because if not for them, this is yet another child who may have gone astray, who may have taken the wrong turn in life. So we also want to acknowledge in this conversation that we're speaking to you, we're speaking of you as well in terms of what you bring to the parenting table. So Anthony, let me come over to you for your comments, and then let's kind of think about the roles of the institutions, the church, and everything else in terms of parenting.
Right. So, while you were speaking about currency, I was thinking about the book, the love languages, but I'm sure that's a topic for another session, right?
That's another program.
But I guess the love language or the currency, right, of the child, it's very important that we understand what is our children's currency. And the way that I understand it is what are the things that the child value, right? I know my son and I know my daughter, right? And I know my children, they love my iPad because I am, as an educational technology specialist, I'm surrounded by technology, right? And this is what I do for a living. So I get to bring them all the toys from my job, and I purchase, I get in a lot of trouble, but that's another topic. But I purchase a lot of technology toys, and my kids love my toys, right? Mm-hmm. And especially my son, he enjoys my iPad. So when we understand what our children enjoy, or we understand their currency, we can use that as a leverage, right? So a great alternative to spanking or cruel punishment is to allow them to earn things as well as take it away. Mm-hmm. Because children need to understand that most importantly, there are rewards for good behavior, right? And I certainly believe that it's much more important to reward good behavior than punishing bad behavior, which is perhaps another segment for tonight, right? Mm-hmm. But while we understand, so when we understand their currency and we use that as a leverage, it helps us to gain back that control. All right. And but before I even continue, Jillian made a really good point about lying. I do not like lying to myself. And I think and an important thing that we must do is that we must teach, since we're on the topic of consequences, we must also teach our children the implications and the consequence of lying, and turn it back on them. Ask them, how would they feel if someone lied to them? And if they were to lie constantly, let's say they were an adult and they were to lie to their boss and they will lie to their co-workers, what type of reputation would they have? And so it turns that onus of responsibility back on them so that they can think about, so rather than just lying just to get that cookie or lying just because to spend an extra 30 minutes outside, they could truly understand, hey man, my lying is it's much deeper than this. It's much more than just fulfilling a pleasure at the time. This is something that could truly damage my career. It could damage my how people think about me, right? So I just wanted to mention that. Mm-hmm. And last, I'm going to end by you were talking about, yes, having that village. The African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and that is certainly true. There are many times that I had to call my sisters, my sister Marilyn in St. Thomas, who are two older boys, Wayne and Wilbur. One is in college, and the other one is an attorney. Thank God for that in New York. And to ask her, get advice about raising young men, right? Especially as a single mother. I had to call my brother a couple of times to say, listen, Keith, my brother, Dr. Peter Sanja, I call him Keith. I said, Keith, man, I think you really need to talk to Amari right now because I don't know what to do. Okay. And even my coworkers, I had to get my coworkers to talk to my son because my son plays basketball, and I am sort of his dad and his coach, and he doesn't want to listen to me all the time. So sometimes I have to call my friend and say, listen, man, I think you need to talk to my son about correct shooting form because he's not getting it from me. And when the children hear the same message from a different voice, it amplifies the truth, right? Because that's where we're heading to. Because I love what Niambi mentioned about constant learning and self-regulation and so forth. All these lead to the truth. So when we incorporate the village into and allow our village to have raised our child, it strengthens our message and solidifies our truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think an important point to raise here, Niambi, I'm coming to you. I like the idea of rewarding positive behavior rather than focusing on punishing bad behavior. So if we keep the focus on, let me say something good. How many times, as a child growing up, we may not even have heard our parents say, I love you, but now that they know better, they do better, right? But the idea of reinforcing positive behavior, it doesn't matter what it is, find something every day to say to your child, good job. Wow, look at what you did today. That was awesome. Like my daughter, and I'm fully aware that girls at her age, at 11, that is the time they start losing interest in math. And of course, we wanted to be interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's where the future is in terms of careers. So any little thing she does with math, I said, wow, Sophie, you are a mathematician. You are so good at this. It doesn't matter if she got like 5 wrong. She's still good, because in her little mind, she's hearing, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. Because mommy says and daddy says, I can do it. But Niambi, I want to come to you for your thoughts. And I also want to stay on that topic of the village, because how can the village raise the child where we now live in a world where parents get upset with teachers for trying to discipline their children? So let's stay on the topic of the village raising the child, and if that is still the case.
Well, I had a couple of thoughts as Jillian and Anthony especially was speaking about rewarding good behavior. And, then you restated it, Simone, and you used the word that I use, which is reinforce or reaffirm. Because reward for me is a problematic term in terms of parenting. Mm-hmm. I feel like when I parent, like the style that I choose is that, for example, my children receive an allowance, but it's not tied to anything. I know like some people have that system of, if you clean your room, you'll get blah, blah. And if you do this chore, you'll get whatever. My children receive an allowance because I feel like it's my way of providing for them and giving them the ability to make choices and, learn how to use their money in a responsible way and to do things for themselves. It's not tied to a chore. In fact, the way I view chores is we all live in this house and we are equal contributors according to our abilities. And so when you do the dishes or clean your room or sweep the floor or whatever chore that you can do the laundry, you're contributing to the household as an equal member of the household. So I love the idea of using the term reaffirm or reinforcing positive behavior. And the word punishment is something that I try not to use as well, because I feel like punishment is so rooted in focusing on misbehavior and, applying a lot of short-term fixes to what we perceive as misbehavior. And like I already said, and not to repeat myself, discipline is about continuous learning and reinforcing that continuous learning about choosing the right behaviors. But on the topic of the village, I might have a slightly unpopular view in that I do believe that it takes a village to raise a child, and I believe in the power of community. But I think where parents fail their children is surrounding them by a village that does not necessarily have the same values as the values that exist within the home. So, for example, as an activist and as a feminist, I firmly reject anything based on a colonialist model. And in our school system, it's very much based on a colonialist model. An anti-colonial framework does not exist within most Christian churches. And so when you expose your child to other adults or a village that is steeped in that very colonialistic rhetoric of authority and how they should interact with authority and who's a safe adult, and who they should listen to and the behaviors that they should model, you have to ensure that those people are a reflection of those values that are being nurtured in your home, because you can't be building up your child's self-esteem in your house and building up their self-confidence in your house and empowering them to have a voice, and then put them within an education system where a teacher tells them derogatory things or kills their spirit. And you and I know, Simone, we went from elementary through to high school together. We know that there are many people who were victims of our school system, within where their creativity was stifled, their voice was stifled, they were maligned, they were marginalized. And if they think about if their parents had been dependent on that school system to build them up and really help them, see that light within them where they were told they could achieve anything, that would have been like, a big failure on the part of the school system. So while I think that, school and religious institutions, wherever people gather, have a role to play in helping to shape and mold people, I just think we have to be very careful as adults or as parents to ensure that it is based on a philosophy that we are also encouraging in our homes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Jillian, I want to come to you, but Anthony, I think you said it best, because I think what I'm hearing Niambi say is you have to choose that village. So, right, it may not be the immediate people around you. And DJ Shan, I'm coming to you for the phone numbers in a minute. It may not be the people directly around you, because those are not the values you want to espouse. Those are not the values you want your children to subscribe to. So you have to be selective with who you consider to be a member of that village. So I want to hear from you, Anthony, and then Jillian, I'm coming to you for your thoughts.
Sure. I wrote in my notes that we must vet the village. Right?
Yes, vet the village. Oh, I like that one. I'm going to steal that one, Anthony. Vet the village.
Vet the village. All right, because we don't want we don't want any vagabond in our village, right?
Yep.
So, and you know what? Sometimes our close friends might be better influences on our children than our close family members, right? Because family does not necessarily equal best interest, right? So, and as a parent and as a father, my first and foremost responsibility of a father, rather than in addition to being a provider for my family, is for the safety of my family, right? And obviously physical safety, but also psychological safety as well. So I want to make sure that the people that I surround my children with are not going to manipulate their minds, right? Or as Niambi mentioned about the colonial model, right? Not having them in that colonial model or that authoritarian style, and so I must vet my friends, before I introduce them to my children or have my children around them. I have some, no disrespect, but I have some friends that I will never, ever leave them one-on-one with my child. It's some conversations that I have or things that I've seen, right? So that's important.
Yes, Jillian, let me come to you.
Vet the village.
That's going to be a new one.
Let me tell you, it's not as easy as we say it right now. It's really not as easy as we say. I know very close relatives. I mean, sometimes my sister says things to my children that I would not say, and I have to make the correction. Something like references to weight. It's harmless. She doesn't mean anything by it, but I'm mindful not to say it. And I have to know, make the correction. Don't tell him that, tell him this instead. And she loves him maybe almost more than I do. She shows him a lot of love. But sometimes the words we use, we do not choose them well at the time. We are not mindful of how we speak to someone, and certain things are ingrained in the whole village. The whole village, the way the comments we may make about being slim or fat, things to do with weight. We like the thickness as opposed to the slimness, and that's ingrained in the village, and we may make comments about that may not be the best to make. But we have to be mindful of where we send our children, where we put our children, and where we cannot control. We have a lot to do at home, because there are many instances when they go to school, we do not pick who they sit next to, who they're in the class with, the relatives, the background of the people. It is very difficult to be, so determinant of to determine who our children have access to. So we have a very big role in the home to teach them things and to be mindful that they get things from out there, that we reinforce the things that we are teaching them in our homes. And definitely the family, the village is important, and in our setting it is very difficult to vet everybody and determine that they will not be with this person or not be with that person. And I know I definitely get your point, and I agree with you, Anthony. But knowing that there are some areas that we cannot control, as parents, we have to be very mindful on how we reinforce and remind and correct things that we know our children may be exposed to that is beyond our control. Just to say that my son will say, I want to go to play with these children. And it's like, I mean, they may not have the same values as what I teach my children at home. But it's very difficult to say, no, you cannot go and be with these children when you're asked to go from home and they're at the school with the same children during the day. You know what I mean? So the village is important, the church is important. You are not with your child every time, and sometimes they get to reinforce the things that you teach your children as well. And as you rightly said, Anthony, calling in a friend to say the same thing. The pastor may say the same thing that you are saying. The neighbor could say the same thing that you are saying. So definitely, I agree. The village is important, and you try to vet as much as you can.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is the conclusion we can come to on that particular point. And something you said kind of resonated with me, Jillian, because it is the thought of what is being said in our family. Because I have to tell you, many of our insecurities come from within our family members. How many times have people made quote unquote jokes about, the size of somebody's nose, their skin complexion, the texture of their hair? In your mind, it might be a joke, but the person on the receiving end is internalizing it. And it is creating the image of who they think they are in the world. So I think a lot of times we have to put a stop to especially these name callings. We have people being called Jughead and Black Boy and some very derogatory nicknames. So we have to start within our own home. And as we go to DJ Shan, when we come back, we also want to talk about what's going on in our own home and how that is contributing to our children. So DJ Shan, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Simone. Roots Connection and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 305 616-4257. And if you're calling from the overseas line, 305-432-9624.
Yes, thank you for that. So while we wait for the calls, we will go over to the Facebook Live.
Also, Simone, we have a WhatsApp number as well.
Okay,
which
go
is
ahead.
235-3095.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. So let's go over to Facebook because we have quite a few comments coming in on the Facebook Live. But first, I want to say good evening to my mom, Medina Senhouse, who's watching and who just reminded me that I'm not wearing my glasses. So now I'm wearing my glasses. So thank you, Mom. You know, once a parent, always a parent, right? So let's go over to Facebook. Anthony, Simon, good evening to you. Thank you for being here with us for this conversation. Let's look at some contributions. Hazel and Anthony, good evening to you all. Claralyn Warrington, good evening to you all. I'm locked in, watching and listening to the program. Jackie Joseph, good evening from Florida, and saying hello to my brother, Anthony Sanja, and others. Your sister is on, Anthony. And it says, yes, I agree that children should have opinion. They are little people and they should have a say in some regard. Parents before didn't want to say anything. We had to be quiet. I never agreed with that. And she also says, honestly, I don't think it worked for everyone. I don't think it worked. We were spanked for silly things. I never understood getting hit without a proper explanation. So thank you, Annette. Hazel Ann, I agree with Simone. Before, our parents will not let us do wrong things. Annette, parenting is a work in progress. Wow, I could not have said it better, Annette. And they will eventually get it. I believe when you are firm and you make the kids see the seriousness of it, they will get it. But it's an ongoing process. Adults don't listen. Why should you expect a child to get it 2 or 3 times? With time, they get it. My mother stopped spanking me about 7 years, and she would teach me right and wrong over and over. And I did get it and remembered some of the things she taught me. Excellent points, guys. Thank you for being here. Tina Belder Ramon, great to see you. She says, good evening, all. Just moved over to Q95. Glad to have you. Tina, Jackie says, interesting topic. Tina, my thoughts exactly. The village has to be vetted. So thank you, guys. Thank you all for being here. Alex Powell, Bruno, great to see you, my brother. He says, amazing. Rosalind Severa McLean is also here. And she says, the meaning of the phrase is not as literal as it seems to be. For me, I am and was very grateful for the eyes of the village that I relied on to look out for my daughter. The eyes who would alert me and be there for her. So that is a very important aspect of bringing up children, and we live in New York. And Anthony Sanja says, thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for saying thank you. So guys, thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution to the conversation. But I want to turn the topic a little bit and talk about the importance of us as parents taking care of ourselves in order to take care of our children. But of course, if you have any comments based on what everyone is saying on Facebook, you can go ahead and share. So Niambi, let's start with you.
Well, I think self-care is extremely important. You know, I think it was my mom who had told me if you're not well, you can't take care of anyone else. And you know, talk about modeling behavior that we have seen growing up. Often when I talk to people about my mother, I always say about how, you know, I grew up always knowing her with a broom in her hand and food on the stove. Whether she was sick, it almost, and she must have had days when she was very sick, but it, as a child, you don't even realize that this person who you call mother is a human being with like human emotions and, you know, who needs respite. And then you become a parent, and again, that's your gold standard. So I remember, like in my early days of parenting, I would be thoroughly exhausted because I had to have the floor that my children could crawl on, and it had to be, you know, look and feel a certain way. But what I was doing was actually first robbing my children of valuable time with me, and also deteriorating my own health and my own well-being. And so one of the ways I found, and there are several ways, I'm just going to share one, but one of the ways I found that was instrumental in helping me take back time for myself was around bedtime. So bedtime became a non-negotiable when my children were small. It's bedtime now. You have to go to your room. You have to go to your bed. You don't have to sleep. If you want to keep your eyes open all night and stare at the ceiling, that's up to you. But when it's bedtime, you go to bed. So that gives me the opportunity to read, to watch TV, to have a shower, to unwind, to have something to eat, do chores if I so choose. But what it does is it set a boundary and a routine for me and my children in which they recognize, okay, this is the period of time in which mommy needs to disengage, right? And if I need something, then I can go to, if it's critical, I can go to her. But my mom needs to disengage to take care of herself at that time, because if you're not doing your best and feeling your best, you can't really contribute to helping your household feel the best.
Anthony, Jillian?
Well, for me, self-care is very important. I remember, as a young boy, my first flight leaving Dominica, right? When I was 7 years old, we were heading to Barbados, and from Barbados, I believe it was to Antigua, and finally to St. Thomas. And I remember getting on Eastern Airlines a long time ago, and on that big jumbo jet, and the stewardess came on, and she said, in case of the cabin loses pressure, you will get this oxygen mask and put it on yourself before you put it on the child. And I'm saying, what? You mean, mommy, you're going to put this on before me? I couldn't quite understand it until later on, right? And the fact of the matter is that, if the parents do not survive, much less for the child who depends on the parent. So that's why self-care is very important. For me, self-care means getting up at before 4 o'clock in the morning and getting to my gym at 4 a.m. in the morning, having a cup of black coffee, and then getting a good exercise before my day. Also, my self-care involves my devotion and make sure I read my Bible and reflect, or something intellectual, stimulate my mind. And as a parent, it's important too that I allow my wife to get self-care. Sometimes I have to leave notes on my bedroom door and says, look, mom is resting, leave her alone. Dad is in the basement if you have any questions. And just as it's important for ourselves to have this type of self-care, our children need to know that self-care is important for them too, right? So my son loves playing basketball. My daughter she's very creative. She likes to draw, and she likes to sing, and she likes to act and craft. So we give them that time to do the things that they enjoy, uninterrupted, right? And realize that, all these things, self-care creates balance. And for us, and for me, on those days when I don't exercise or I don't read my Bible in the morning, when I go straight to work, I know this is probably going to be an awful day, right? Because
yeah, absolutely. Jillian, I want to come to you, but Anthony, you raised an excellent point, because you talked about the role of the man, right? And I think that is so important, because as we know, women are many times the primary caretaker of children, right? But I think as husbands and boyfriends, men have to step up into the role. I've heard situations where men will say, I will change a diaper, but I am not changing a poopy diaper. right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, what if the mother said, I'm not changing a poopy diaper? How is this going to end? Right. So I think men have to take up the role and say, you know what, my wife has been doing this all day long. I know I just came from work. Maybe I'm stressed out, or maybe my wife is working from home, but let me give her maybe an hour or two. Absolutely. Just to do nothing, like Niambi mentioned. If she chooses to do chores, or if she just chooses to do absolutely nothing, she has that to look forward to. And guess what that does for her all day long? It gives her the energy, because she's thinking to herself, you know what, at the end of the day, I know I'm going to have 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours simply to myself. That does not involve being a caretaker. And, you know, it's interesting because, you know, when Sophia was a baby, that is what we did. We actually had, you know, night duty. So my mom would watch her for 2 nights. My husband would watch her for 2 nights, and I would watch her for, you know, the rest of the time, because we knew that everyone in the household needed to get sleep. And Jillian, I know you're familiar with this right now, because when you have a baby, they sleep for 2 hours and they're up. So that means if you're a single parent, and, you know, we have to commend, you know, those single parents, everyone who is doing this without the help of a village, without the help of a partner, without the help of a support system. You know, our hats go out to you, because we know how incredibly difficult being a parent can be. And for you to do this all on your own, we have to commend you. So Jillian, let's come over to you for your thoughts in terms of self-care and its role in parenting, and anything else you want to share.
I have enough respect for single parents, especially women.
Yep, fathers and mothers.
The thing is, I have it for women, even because the energy, the emotional roller coaster that women go through, that's different from men. You know, sometimes your time of the month, you have to go through all of those things that can get you like real crazy. And I am grateful that I have help. My husband is very helpful. And I explain to my children about the frustrations that come with dealing with everything in the home. Even so that my husband and my 5-year-old, they were in a conversation, and something came up about my husband dying, and he said, Daddy, you cannot die. Who will help mommy when she's frustrated? Who is it? So he knows that, you know,
it's a partnership.
Yes, and it gets tough dealing with all the things that have to be dealt with in the home. And I work from home. In our culture, a lot of people do not understand that working from home is still working.
It is.
And when you are working for someone else and you have to go to work, the village is very understanding to watch the children for you. But when you're working from home, they feel you are home, and they don't feel that need to have the children because you are home, you know, you are there. And that can make it be a little more stressful than it should be. I always tell them, when I'm making the millions, all of us are going to enjoy it. So during the process, I need your help, because you would want to share the $1 million with me when I make it. So have the child for a few hours. Let me focus on making that million or two, you know. So I don't waste time in saying I need the children to be away right now. I don't feel any way in saying that. And I tell people, when my children come to your house, they are doing you a favor. You get to enjoy them. So it's not a burden. You get to enjoy my children. What do you want to
You convince them, right?
Simone, I just wanted to touch on the cultural and historical context, especially about self-care,
Yes.
particularly when it relates to Black people. So the context for Black women historically is that we've had to basically hold the entire village on our backs, raise the children of the slave master, shore up our men who were being killed and victimized in the field. And, you know, whether or not we know it, science has proven that we carry the trauma genetically of our forefathers as Black people. And a lot of times we deny ourselves the opportunity for self-care because we feel guilty about taking
Absolutely.
time for ourselves. And we have a societal standard that we're aspiring to. And as people who have partners, so if you have a partner, whether your partner is male or female, it's our responsibility to ensure that each of us is taking time for ourselves, that each person within that relationship, especially as parents, have the time to rejuvenate and rest, and feel their best. And, you know, Anthony talked about putting a note to say mommy's resting and you can talk to daddy. And for a lot of people, like in social media, we'll see that celebrated as, you know, because it doesn't feel like the norm, but that should be normal. That should be normal. It shouldn't be something that we have to celebrate because he's one of a few who does it. It should be the standard that we're aspiring to, in that we recognize that both physical and mental rest is important. We have to have our mental faculties straight in order to be able to pour into our children, in order to be able to pour into society, and in order to be part of other people's village, right? Because we're saying a village is important to us in terms of who we surround our children with and who we can you know, rely on. We form part of a village for other people. But if we are not mentally and physically rejuvenated and rested, we can't provide those strong pillars for other people as part of their village as well. So I just wanted to, you know, look at the historical and cultural context of being Black people, and how that really in many ways has robbed us of, you know, the idea of self-care, and it's something that we need to bring back and relearn and reintegrate into the fabric of our society.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Niambi, because we do keep the trauma of our ancestors in our DNA. And I firmly believe in that, but we also keep the fortitude of our ancestors in our DNA as well. And speaking on this topic, you know, we find that sometimes even when we as Black women, we are offered help, we feel guilty. I have a cousin, she's the vice president of a law firm. She has a young son. And you will be amazed. She just feels obligated to do everything. And as much as the rest of the family keeps wanting to help her to do the laundry, to do the cooking, to keep the little boy for a little while, she just many times will refuse the help because she feels the obligation to do it all as a single parent for the most part, because her partner does not live with her. You know, she feels that obligation and she feels that guilt for even entertaining the thought of accepting the help. So I think we have a lot of relearning to do with regards to how we are raising our children, with regards to how we are caring for ourselves as parents. And another important point we have to look at is how are we modeling in front of our children? Because I think someone mentioned it and I made a quick note because I think it is so important. What is that model that we are presenting to our children? Because we all know that their eyes are always on us. So within the home, what is the person we are modeling that they will aspire to? And outside the home, what is the person we're modeling? And I say this because, you know, especially for us as women, whether we accept it or not, we set the tone in the household, right? So what is the energy like in your household? Is everyone always on eggshells? because you're always quote unquote in a bad mood. And let's face it, people have frustrations, especially in this economy, with work being hard to come by, rising prices wherever you look, the uncertainty. You send your child to school, there's a school shooting. So people have genuine concerns, genuine frustrations that have many people on edge. But how are you pulling this back so that when you're in the household, when you're in the car, you're driving, are you showing road rage? If you're on the phone having a conversation, and I'll just give this quick example, because my mom and I speak every day on the phone, right? But as soon as I pick Sophia up from school, that conversation has to be adjusted. So the words that I would normally speak to my mom, knowing that there's an 11-year-old in the car and she's completely tuned into the conversation, you have to change the words that you use. Are you swearing in front of your children? Are you showing aggressive behavior in front of your children? Because unlike the spanking that you're giving them, that's only teaching them to be violent, the behavior that you're modeling in front of them is teaching them how to behave in the world around them. So I think it is so important to see ourselves as models. So I want to touch on that. And then I also want to touch on social media, peer pressure. So we still have a lot to cover. And, the time always wants to run away with us. But there's still so much to talk about. We may have to have a second part to this program. So Anthony,
Simone, do you remember the saying, something about something at home carries abroad? What was that saying?
It was, some guys help us out. Behavior at home, manners at home, manners
at home carries
abroad.
Yeah. I think it's going back to that connection piece I talked about in the beginning, where I said that, it's about focusing your parenting style to be more democratic and inclusive, and treating your children with respect and equality. And that also then helps them mirror the connections and attachment within the rest of the family, and how they treat others within the family. So the expectation is not only that I respect them and they respect me as their mother, or they respect their father, but they also treat each other with respect. And when that expectation is upheld within the house, like I always, when I talk to parents, I talk to them about when my children argue. So first of all, arguments rarely happen between my children, but they're human beings, and so they have their little tiffs within each other. But they will say things like, "You're a Cheerio," and the other one will say, "No, you're a burnt cherry." Like that's the extent of their argument within each other, because that level of respect, equality is there, but also they know that certain things will not be tolerated in terms of their behavior towards each other. One thing I taught them very early was how to apologize to each other, and apologize properly. So when one would do something to each other, not just saying I am sorry, but why are you sorry? I am sorry. Use the person's name. Say why you're sorry. What are you sorry for? Those are the things that we have to teach. Those are not things that a person wakes up knowing, right? You have to teach these things and model these behaviors back to them too. I'm sorry, I didn't listen to you when you were trying to explain why you were late for class, or, like you have to model the behavior back and forth so that it becomes part of what your children do at home, so that when they exist within society, they can mirror that. And I only have one other thing to say, because in this conversation, this part of the conversation, I feel like Jillian when she was like, "But guys, I spanked my children." I swear in front of my...
Niambi, give me 1 second, Niambi. Hold that thought. Make a note of what you're about to say. I think we have a call coming in.
Good night, hello, good night.
Yes, good night.
Good night.
Yeah, I just want to fit in conversation here tonight. Is habit at home, carry abroad.
Yes, thank you.
You understand me? All right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for calling.
Yes, habit at home.
Yes.
Carries abroad.
Yes. Thank you.
But I was going to say, I feel kind of like Jillian in the conversation about language in front of the children. because I swear, and I swear in front of my children, and so the rule is, because not my children are older than everybody else's.
Right.
So the rule is, you're allowed to swear as long as it's used in the proper context.
Oh my Lord. You see, and that's why we said everybody has their own approach to parenting. You have to figure out what works for you, right?
But I mean, the fact that rule exists and it rarely happens is a testament to the fact that we have respectful conversations. Like, you know, they're not swearing at each other, they're not swearing at other people, but they know that if they need to use the word, just use it in the proper context.
And that works for you.
That works for me.
Yeah, absolutely, Anthony. Thank you, Niambi.
Yes, for sure. Well, let me just make this disclaimer first. I am by far not a perfect parent, right? I make mistakes.
None of us are.
Right? You know, so even though I'm mentioning all these nice things and all these flowery things about parenting and so forth, you know, realistically, we all make mistakes, right? And I'm not without sin, right? But one thing that when I was listening to Niambi, one thing I was thinking about is Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Be the change that you expect to see in the world," right? So oftentimes when I'm dealing with my own children, when I'm dealing with my own students in the classroom, right? When I'm dealing with my wife, right? You know, I want to practice, right? Or the golden rule, to treat others how you want to be treated, right? You know, so I want to practice or model the way that I want to be treated. You know, so when you mentioned about road rage, especially when my children are in the car, and when I show other people respect, right? When I show my wife respect, you know, when I show myself respect, right? When I model these things, you know, the hope is that your children could do it, because, you know, it's one thing to actually tell the child or teach your child right and wrong, but it's another thing to actually practice what you preach. And that is very important.
Yes, thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Anthony. Modeling, the importance of modeling.
Let me tell you, I am being watched like a hawk.
Yes, you are.
By my 5-year-old. Like a hawk. Anytime he sees me doing something that I told him not to do, he has to remind me, "You said I should not watch videos because it is too early. So why do you have your phone?"
Yep.
Why do you have your phone watching a video? You said no screens. Why do you have a screen? I mean, that couldn't fly back then. Now you cannot speak like that to us. You couldn't speak like that to adults. You can't speak like that to your mother back then, you know? But he has the leeway to tell that to me, and I will not thank him for that. I will not. We will have a conversation about it.
Right.
And like he's too young to explain to him what's happening with me and why I behave a particular way that be opposed to what I said to him.
And we have to always keep in mind that children live what they learn, and they learn what they live, because you can say 100 times to him, "Do not watch videos in the early morning." The behavior that you're modeling is saying the opposite. It's a contradiction. So children are always going to learn from the actions more than from the words. So very important that we're making that distinction this evening. But I think also we have to look at the social media, because many times I hear folks say, "Oh, that social media thing, that's not for me, that's not for me, that's not for me." But your children, your nieces, your nephews, all the young people in your life, guess where they're hanging out? And guess what they're doing from the time you jump on Facebook and thinking you're going to follow them, you're going to friend them to see what they're doing. They're gone. They move on to Instagram. And then they move on to, what's the next one? Snapchat? DJ Shan, you can help me. Snapchat, and this chat and the other chat and TikTok. We can't keep up. We can't keep up. And this is why we're having this conversation about what are the values that you're instilling in your children, because our eyes and our ears cannot be everywhere, right? Sophia is 11. She's not yet allowed to have a phone. But guess what? All her friends in school have cell phones with internet access that they take to school. So if I'm as a parent not teaching her the values of saying, hey, just because my friends are looking at that video, I shouldn't look at that video, I'm fighting a losing battle. So this conversation we're having is about what are you instilling in your children to make sure that they are, productive members of society, they are happy, they have their own interests, their own lives. But how are we insulating them from all of the negative influences around the world? So guys, the role of social media, how do we protect our children from, the peer pressure, the social media? And then before we end, we have to talk about the goals. What are your goals as a parent? What are you hoping to accomplish at the end of the day? What type of child are you looking to send into the world? So what are your goals in terms of being a parent? So social media and peer pressure, your thoughts on that?
I think self-regulation is so important. Mm-hmm. I remember growing up, like my sister and I, we never had, no screen time. Like we watch TV all the time. Up to this day, I watch a lot of TV. I have one friend that tells me she doesn't know how I do it. I'll read a book, watch TV, and listen to music all at the same time. Yep. And so as a parent, it's something that I never regulated with my children. I allowed them to self-regulate. If you have homework to do, then you need to decide how much time you're going to devote to watching videos, watching TV, and doing your homework. And your responsibility is to get your homework done, because we're going to have a problem if your homework isn't done. Like helping your child to decide. I don't ever remember specifically saying, don't watch this content. But I remember a specific instance of my children being at a certain age and saying, oh, I can't watch that because I don't think it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. Because I had taught them what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, as opposed to saying, don't watch this, don't watch that. Helping them discern for themselves what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. That's self-regulation piece. But also like the realistic piece of letting your children know that there'll be a lot of things coming at them, mm-hmm. some of which are meant to break them, some of which will be opposite of what they have learned at home. And how do they, number one, deal with this? And number two, what long-term impact do they let it have or not have on them? I think like as long as you are working with your children to empower them and build that self-confidence and reinforce and reaffirm the values within the home, then whatever they see on social media, whatever is said on social media will have a minimal impact on them. And I'm not talking about things like extreme cases where somebody's bullied and, that mob mentality that can happen on social media. But I'm just talking about regular interactions where somebody might disagree with you or say something that you don't like. What energy are you going to give to that? Mm-hmm. And how are you going to make it impact you? I think is an important conversation to have with your children once they start using social media.
Yeah, and the kids get it. I have to tell you, the children get it. Because even with music, we'll be driving in the car and you'll be amazed the type of music that comes on the radio, from, promiscuous girl to, shaking the booty and all the songs. And I will turn it down and I say, nope, inappropriate. And I will catch Sophia. If I miss a song now, she'll be like, Mommy, can you turn that down? Inappropriate. So that is what we are working towards. We are working towards that self-regulation that Niambi is talking about. We're working towards those goals that we want to instill with them. And I think especially for those of us who are parents who grew up in a foreign country and then we have children being raised in a foreign land, because many times what we find is we want to give them the things that we never had. So what ends up happening? We have children who grow up entitled. We have children who grow up thinking, there are no consequences for me because I am special, right? So I think when we talk about the goals that we are aspiring to in terms of parenting, one of those goals has to be living a legacy of the character we want this person to be. So I think many times we think of legacy in terms of leaving money, in terms of leaving wealth, in terms of leaving a home. But what about the legacy of the character you want this person to be, the qualities you want instilled in this person, the values of education, financial responsibility, of just being a good person? And for me, a lot of that starts with the words that we use with our children. And one of the rules we have at my house is that we only use positive language, right? So I know many times when children are disobedient, we'll say, you know what, I don't like your little attitude. And we put the finger in the mix, right? But at our house, we say, well, are you showing positive spirit? Are you being a positive person today? Or are you being a negative person? Because I think that is important. Because even if we're thinking we're using negative words to convey a positive message, it doesn't work, right? And I think also we have to let children be entitled to their feelings, because children have rights. We heard a lot about the rights of the girls recently in the news, but all children have rights. And I think part of those rights is the right to security, the right to an education, food, shelter, all that good stuff. But I also think added to that should be the right to their emotions, because we have bad days too. And to tell a child, oh, you need to snap out of it. Really? No, you need to have the child process your emotion. Let them take their own time out so that they can come back, and having processed those emotions, they can come back and be that positive person that we know that children are inherently positive. No child is born, and Tina says it's best on the Facebook Live. Children are not born as delinquents. Delinquency is learned in the home, no matter how small. Delinquent behavior, children model after parents. So guys, the time is speeding against us this evening, but Anthony, Jillian, let me hear your thoughts.
So, you made an excellent point about emotions. I remember a recent conversation with my son where I mentioned to him, I said, Amari, it's okay if you're angry, it's okay if you're upset. Your emotions were given to you by God.
Mm-hmm.
And I value your anger is the same way that I value your happiness. But there's one thing that you need to know. It's not so much of your emotions, but what you do with your emotions.
Absolutely.
So I understand you're angry, but you're not going to slam any doors in my house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I know you're excited, but you're not going to take all the attention away from your sister because she has a point too, and you're not going to dominate this family conversation, right? We're all going to listen and care for each other. In terms of goals, I love what Niambi mentioned again about self-regulation. For me, my goal is twofold. I want my children to have balance, right? So when I think of balance, I think about emotional balance, spiritual balance. I think about their mental health, the things that give them pleasure, right? So it's not just, they're not just on a high all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I expect them to have good character and be professional. Even though they're young, I expect them to have good moral values, right? Physical, even their physical well-being. My son plays basketball. He's an excellent athlete. He plays AAU basketball, right? But at the same time, exercise is good, but you must make time for your homework too. So it's not all just about sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also his social skills are very important. Who are your friends and what the quality of your friends are, and lastly, material things, right? As the Bible says, these material things are called vanity, right? You make sure that he's not his laptop or his phone are not idols, and he must remember the most important things in his life, and he must and not just my son, my daughter, right? Even myself, we must have balance in life. But at the same time we have balance, the reality is my children are going to compete with children from Dominica, from Taiwan, from China, and elsewhere. And at the same time, I give them balance. I want them to have an advantage. I want my daughter, my son to have academic advantage. One of the reasons I became an educator is not because I really wanted to teach. I wanted to go to medical school. I even told my brother, Dr. Peter Sanja, that if you ever hear me even talk about being a teacher, pull me on the side and say, Newton, what you doing, man? Because teachers don't drive Mercedes Benzes, right? I want a Porsche, I want a Benz, I want a Bentley, man. So but back to this. I want to give my children an academic advantage, so that when they leave my household at age 18, they could stand on their own 2 feet. My son does his own laundry though. I don't wash his clothes. I don't clean his room. My daughter makes her own bed and cleans her own room.
Character, a legacy of character.
Absolutely, because at some point these children they're going to transition from children to adults. And when they're adults, they're going to compete with other adults, right? And survival of the fittest will kick in. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that they not only get an advantage, but part of leaving a good legacy is to have a good advantage when you're there and when you actually season the moment.
Yeah, and part of that legacy should be raising independent people, because I have a cousin, she has a daughter, she's 18, and she still doesn't know how to do laundry. And that's a problem, because how is she going to be an independent person if at 18 she still doesn't even know how to do laundry and cook herself a meal? So at 9, Sophia started making eggs, because my goal is to train you to be an independent person, both in terms of your thoughts and in terms of your ability to take care of yourself. So Jillian, let me come to you. And then guys, we have to start winding down the conversation. And I want to make sure we do so by talking about how do we support parents. So Niambi, especially for you, if there are any resources you can point us to with regards to anything online for those of us who are interested in learning more, because like Anthony said, there are no perfect parents and we will never be perfect parents. But how can we at least have some tools that can help us to improve one day at a time with regards to being good parents? And I don't want to forget the Facebook Live comments. Anthony, having the privilege of being a parent of 2 adult children in the USA, being quite an experience. I can imagine. Victorious as God plans, good vibes. And Anthony reminds us that men do single parenting too. Absolutely, Anthony. And I know quite a few who do a fantastic job at it. Victorious, and she is going to be one out at some point. I think she's referring to something we talked about before. Tina says also the same children. And oh yes, we read this one already. Let's see if we're missing everyone. I always like to acknowledge the comments and the contribution of our Facebook Live audience. Let's make sure we did not miss anyone. Nope, I think we're good to go. So Jillian, let's come over to you. And as we wind down, let's talk about how do we support parents?
All right. So in terms of just to backtrack on what you asked before, my goal as a parent, I have been blessed with my children by God, and I want to raise them in a way that they can get to mature to be able to walk into what God has planned for them. So that's my first goal, to help them to identify what God has created them for. Secondly, I want to parent with intentionality. I think if we do that, do everything with intentionality, we would be able to see where we need to improve, we'd be able to see where we fail, where we need to change things. Intentionality is missing in many aspects of our lives, in our society. So I think being intentional about things, we lack that greatly in our culture. And also growing my children, raising them to know that the possibilities are endless for them. There's no limitation on anything. If someone else can be a a pilot, if someone else can create a rocket ship, you can do it. It might take you more time, but you can do it. So I think that mindset of great possibilities, I want to raise my children with that mindset in every area. And if I'm going to raise them to walk into their destinies as far as God has created them, then everything else will fall into place in terms of they being good citizens, good neighbors, good friends. And I think you also mentioned, how do we help parents? For me, as a tutor, an educator, a mentor, I want to help parents to see where their role comes in to make things possible for their children, especially as far as their mindset goes. It's okay to provide clothing and shelter, but it doesn't stop there. Your child's mindset is critical. And the things you say, the things you do, how you behave, because you may tell a child today, you can do all things, yet later that evening, you are speaking limiting words about your own self. What does that say? You can do all my daughter, you can do everything. Nothing can stop you. Then later on in the evening, someone is asking you to do something and you are confessing that you cannot do it. You are confessing that there's a limitation on you.
That
And the
modeling behavior we talked about, right?
That modeling behavior is important. And I tutor students mostly at the primary school level, but I've started now targeting parents with some of the work that I'm doing, because I'm saying once I'm finished with the child, I've taught them those skills. The parent has to continue. The support has to be there. The parent should know exactly what was communicated to that child, so they can evaluate whether they are putting it into practice. So that is a way that I feel that I can make that connection between the dealing with helping the child and also helping the parent to bridge that gap and putting things together.
Thank you, Anthony.
Sure.
How do we support parents?
For sure. For me, I mentioned before that I made a lot of mistakes parenting myself, being that authoritarian type of parent, or no, more authoritative parent. And one thing that helped me change is I spent time to learn. I often use the hashtag the success student on social media, because even though I'm an adult, I consider myself a lifelong learner, right? So there's some important books that I read. So one of them is How to Talk So That Children Can Listen is one. I often read articles from Psychology Today about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is important, and positive psychology. It's important that parents, we listen to podcasts, we listen to shows like this one, on Q95, about, family shows. We should take time to listen to our favorite pastors, online, right? And also, in terms of a technology resource, I highly recommend a website called Common Sense Media. Just this weekend, my son asked me, Dad, can I get a TikTok account? I said, what? I said, sure, you can get a TikTok account, but first, we need to sign a contract. We need to sign a media contract, because you need to understand what sexting is. You need to understand what cyberbullying is. You need to understand, how much time you spend on the internet. And all these things are going to be part of your contract that we sign together, right? So, and there are templates for this on the Common Sense Media website. So, so take time to learn, right? Just like our children are learning, and part of reversing the cycle of things that went wrong in our past, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, is to read good literature and some research on effective parenting.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. Niambi.
Yeah, I think the biggest gift we can give to our children is making them know that we believe in the vision that they have for themselves and not necessarily the vision that we have for them. Giving your children the tools to shape their own vision of who they want to be in this world and achieve the things that they want to achieve, and knowing that you will support them through that no matter what, is the biggest gift. A lot of parents project onto their children, oh, I couldn't be a doctor, so now I want my child to be a doctor. I couldn't be a lawyer, so now I want my child to be a lawyer. But what does your child want? Imagine how different things would be if you took the time to ask your child, what do you want and what do you need from me to help you achieve that? And I think for me, in terms of my parenting goal, that's where I always want to be. I always want to know, what do my children need and what do they need from me to help them achieve the vision that they have for themselves? So I just wanted to share that. And in terms of resources, things that I normally recommend to people, there's a book called Positive Discipline. It's by Jane Nelson. And it's a good resource that helps with some of the unlearning that we have and the logic behind how to approach discipline as part of a model that we implement over time as opposed to a reaction to bad behavior. There's also a book called No Bad Kids for people who have younger kids. It's by an author called Janet Lansbury. And there's also a parenting blog for people who like to follow blogs. There's lots of parenting blogs, but the one I really like is called Your Parenting Partner. The author is Louise Clark, and she just has some very practical. I think we talked a lot about theoretical things tonight, but she has a lot of practical approaches of how to apply, some of those things, involve your kids in making decisions in the home and what decisions are age appropriate and how you integrate your child into family decisions and the things that affect them. So I would recommend those 3 resources.
Yes, and thank you so much. Thank you, Anthony, Sanja, Niambi, Mathieu, John, and Jillian, LaRocque, DJ Shan, Showing, Mr. Gregoire for the time on the air. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this important conversation. Our Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Q95 listeners, thank you for being a part of the conversation. And as you know, we were talking about parenting in the 21st century. So I think we got a good sense of the challenges we face, but I also think we got a good sense of the opportunities, because this is the opportunity to change the approaches which were used in the past, because now the future calls for a different type of person, a creative person, a problem solver, a creative thinker, someone who can think outside the box, or as like Jody Dublin likes to say, to think that there's no box, because the world is changing so rapidly. So that is what we do here at Roots Connections on Q. We talk about the different fields that are evolving, the different parts of our lives, the different areas of our lives that are evolving. So don't forget to come back. The next time we'll be here is October 26th for another intriguing, engaging opportunity to be a part of the conversation. Of course, I am Simone Mathieu, and it is always wonderful to be here with you. Don't forget to follow Push Past 10, and don't forget to follow Q95 FM Radio on Facebook and YouTube to stay on top of everything. And of course, you can log on to q95da.com for all the best in programming. And also, finally, don't forget to check out pushpast10.com so that you can keep apprised of all the great work that Dominicans are doing around the world. And as a matter of fact, right now we're featuring the flying dress of Dominica because they are doing important work. So it's about creating economic opportunities. It is about financial independence. It is about looking at the changes in the world and how can we benefit from those changes, but what are the challenges that we will face in these changes as well? So again, thank you for being here for another episode of Roots Connections on Q, and we look forward to the next time that we are joined, that we join you for another conversation. DJ Shan, as always, thank you. Tina Bell says, great program. She says, true, there are no perfect parents. It's only when one becomes a grandma, for example, you realize how much you didn't even know as a parent. And don't get me started on those grandmas, because, you know, I look at my mom now and I'm like, wait, that's the lady who raised me. Because she is the softest, kindest person right now. But back in the day, she would say, you know what, even if you're too tall, I'm going to stand on the table and I'm going to, you know, what we did in the past. So, you know, it is just wonderful to see now that she's a grandmother, that she gets to show a softer side. And she always said when we were growing up, you know, once you guys grew up and left the house, I could breathe. Right? So it is okay if you're struggling as a parent. It is okay if this is difficult. Together as a community, we can help each other. We can support each other on this important journey. So again, good evening, good night to everyone. Thank you for being here. Anthony, Niambi, and Jillian, thank you for taking time out from your busy schedules to be here. And we should do this again. So I hope you will join me on the next episode. And with that, we say good night and thank you for being here. Unmute your mic and say bye to the people.
All right, good night, everyone. The pleasure is mine.
Thank you. All right, guys. Nice to have you guys on. Take care.
Oh, children, home. Wanna go home. Home. Oh.